So I want to welcome everybody to this afternoon's session. My name is Christine Krieger, and I am the professional development consultant for the Colorado State Library. We had a wonderful turnout for today's webinar. And this webinar all kind of began with an email from Jessica Fredrickson, who is one of our presenters for today. Soon after libraries started doing more virtual programming and after closing down. And it's been really an amazing partnership between the Colorado Libraries for Early Literacy, or CLEL, the Colorado Commission for the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, and Deafblind, and the Colorado Talking Book Library, which is an integral part of the Colorado State Library. So once again, my name is Christine Krieger, and with me today, I have Timothy, and I'm gonna say it wrong again, Chevalier, who is from the Colorado Commission for the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, and Deafblind, Jessica Fredrickson from the Colorado Libraries for Early Literacy, and Teresa Kalber and Debbie McLeod from the Colorado Talking Book Library. So without further ado, next slide, Beth. I also have the lovely Beth Christ, who is kind of my backup for today's session because, you know, wonky internet can happen. And also just to help us kind of keep track of everything that's going on today. Before we get started for the actual session, I wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping tips. We do have an hour and a half for our discussion today. We are providing real-time captioning today, and if you would like to use the captioning or are just curious as to what it is all about, if you go to the bottom menu down at the bottom where you can choose to see the chat and the participants and all of that stuff, you should see a closed caption CC button. If you click on that, the caption should appear. There's also a little, actually there's a little up arrow next to it where you can choose to show subtitle or choose to view the full transcript. And that is your choice to use or not use as you see fit. Everyone but the presenters are muted for today's session, but there will be interaction opportunities and we welcome your questions throughout. And as we go through, if you have questions today, it would help me and the other presenters immensely if you would type the word question in all caps before typing your question into the chat. That way we can scroll and find your question easily. We have a couple people who can help make sure that we are seeing the chat questions. Today, we are also focusing on web content accessibility guidelines and how they relate to virtual programming. And lastly, we are recording today's session. I'm double checking that I have that on. And the archive will be made available on the Colorado Virtual Library website. I also do intend to email it to everybody who registered for today's webinar. And we had quite a few people who, once we hit the magic 100 number for Zoom, we had quite a few people who I'll send the archive to because they emailed me directly and they were unable to get in. So I think that is it for introductions. And Timothy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, good. So I'm with the Colorado Commission for the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, Deafblind, as was introduced. And one of the things that we focus on is accessibility, especially as it pertains to communication and environmental access. And that's mandated by the Department of Justice. Note the term Civil Rights Division. They mandate that this emphasis on civil right under the ADA prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in employment or state and local government, or public accommodations, which are such things as libraries, restaurants, so forth, commercial facilities, transportation, and telecommunications. The social model of disability does not accept the term impairment. Those are attributes that, such attributes that focus on disability are, for example, the inability to hear, the inability to walk. Whereas what we're supporting today is the social model of disability, which is used to refer to restrictions caused by society when it does not give equivalent access via accommodations, as mandated by the Department of Justice. And so what we want to emphasize is that when experiences are designed with accessibility in mind, everyone benefits. So next slide, please. So I talked about our focus is going to be on the social model, where we focus on the restrictions, but what we're going to focus on are the accommodations. Next slide, please. And so when experiences are designed with accessibility in mind, everyone benefits. For example, the curb cut effect, or even the push button to open the door has benefited individuals who use wheelchairs. It was originally designed for individuals who were in wheelchairs, but as a college professor, when I'm bringing in a stack of books in my arms, all I got to do is push the button with my elbow and it opens the door. It benefits me. It benefits individuals that are pushing strollers. Curb cuts benefit people on bicycles and skateboarders. And so the idea is that when accessibility is made for one in mind, it's made for all in mind, in the sense that it enables everyone to navigate quite readily. And so social model makes curb navigation unnecessary by making the curb cut. Thus the curb cut is no longer, or the curb is no longer a barrier. And the same thing is true for virtual access, what we're going to cover today. So captioning benefits all, but it has an undervalued learning benefit, as has been documented by research. Research shows that students who are struggling with reading or learning English, same language subtitling can actually support development of literacy. In other words, rather than simply being annoying, as some people well complain about captioning, listening to English and reading English subtitles at the same time, in other words, multi-channels of communication, helps learners to decode words and enhances reading abilities. There's been several controlled studies with school children in early grades in which the research found that the captions contributed to word recognition and comprehension skills. Another study found that subtitles support the understanding of film or audio sources. So the emerging research shows that when students listen to a story while tracking the transcript, their literacy skills will be improved. And so today's focus will be on story time and storybook, and how does that, how can we enhance accessibility for all and at the same time address literacy? So the next slide, please. So the Debbie, I believe this was yours.
Yes, this was my slide. So it's chat time. I'm going to turn on my video for 1 minute so that you can see me. Hi, how are you? I'm going to turn my video back off. But what we would like to know is, could you put in the chat what programs, virtual programs, and online services your library is currently offering or planning to offer? And I know things are kind of changing as we're in this COVID period. So if you could share with the group your virtual programs or online services. And so we have virtual story time and virtual teen gaming, and oh, you're typing fast. It's hard to read. So we have baby time, toddler time, and discussion books. I saw Legos going by pretty fast. Virtual trivia, that looks like fun. Technology tutorials. Online adult book club. Oh, a memory cafe. So we've got yoga. It looks like story times seem to be fairly common, so I guess we picked the right example to go with. So thanks for sharing those. That's wonderful. And I hope everybody's had a chance to put in their input, and thank you for that. So next slide, please. One of the things that we wanted to do was use the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines as kind of a framework in which to put these suggestions on how we can make our programs accessible. And the World Wide Web Consortium, otherwise known as W3C, which you may have heard of, is an international community that develops open standards to ensure long-term growth of the web. So they have lots of pieces to what they work on, but accessibility guidelines are a piece of it. And these WCAG guidelines are now in 2.1. So that's the version that we're working with here. So there's 4 of them, and you can see them. Perceivable. It can't be invisible to the senses. So what that means is including things like, if you can't hear, then you would need captioning. If you can't see, you would need audio description. If you are actually sharing something physically, you might not assume that everybody can see it, and think about how it could be experienced sensorially or tactily. Think of the use of color with regards to color blindness. So there's things like that. Operable. So is the interface navigable and responsive to users? And what that includes is thinking about keyboard issues, thinking about the timing of your operation. Are you expecting people to do it really quickly? And they may have operator issues around their hands, for example. Also think about the possibility of how the operation could affect seizures or physical reactions. How easy is it to navigate? So, and then what input modalities are you allowing? Is it just keyboard, or could it be audio, or could it be breath switches? Those kinds of things. Under understandable, it's the information and operation of the user interface. And so what that kind of includes then, it can't be beyond the user understanding. So are you using unusual words that many people wouldn't understand? Are you using abbreviations or those pesky acronyms? Is the content or operation especially predictable? So getting user input on that helps. And we have all experienced this, and I'm sure have found it useful, input assistance. So that comes in spelling error suggestions. And I know that I have benefited from that myself really a lot. So there are other ways of providing input assistance. And the last one then is robust, and that's around content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably. So it's got to be able to include compatible name, roles, and values and status messages. So the content and the platforms kind of need to be robust so that they can evolve. There's much more, many more examples of the specifics for each of these four categories, and they are in the handout. So in the handouts that we have provided, I have included understanding techniques for success criteria, and there's under each one of these, there's a whole list of ways that of items that you can address, and they should include the links so you can go right to them. So we don't want to spend a ton of time digging too deeply into these, but I think with this overview you kind of get the idea. So I will turn it over to the next slide, and I forget who's going to pick up. I think it's Jessica. Or is it Timothy?
It's Timothy, actually.
Okay, Timothy.
Okay. So what we have is story boxes provided to us by the Colorado School for the Deaf and the Blind. And the story boxes contain the principles that Debbie McLeod so effectively outlined and explained. And the four principles, if you could identify them and be prepared to share an example, I'm speaking to the participants now, be prepared to share an example of content accessibility as either perceivable, operable, understandable, or robust. And so at the end of the 10-minute video that we are now about to watch, you will be asked to share any one of those four principles. And so with that, we'll proceed. The student that they are working with, the students rather that they are working with, are deafblind. So this will be an excellent example of how videos should not only be captioned, but should also have audio description. So let's proceed to the video.
So Timothy, you're going to need to share your screen and to do the
okay,
video.
we'll do it from my end, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Stop sharing, okay. And we'll go to screen 1, I believe it is.
And we're still seeing Beth's screen, so.
Oh, is that Beth's screen? Oh, I get it. Okay, let me switch to mine.
There you go.
Okay, so now I can't see it. Let me take out, I got to go to the second screen. All right, so we'll click on story boxes now, and hopefully mine will work.
So, shoot.
Video link is down in the notes section.
Yeah, when he's sharing his screen, he can't see the slides. Does anybody else have access to that URL?
I do. Oops. I almost exited out of our meeting here. Let me pull up the video. So once again, we're going to be watching a video, which is an example of an accessible video. Sorry, I keep starting. So we're asking all participants to look for those principles in action. And let me share my screen here.
Thank you, Jessica.
No problem. Okay, let me now play this video.
Zooms out and fades to a solid white background. CSCB logo, Excellence in Service, Colorado School for the Deaf and the Blind, established 1874.
Title:
Story Boxes for the Blind and Visually Impaired. Title, Julie Vinacore, Teacher of the Visually Impaired. Julie is seated in a classroom.
A story box is a group of collected objects that you put together to help a student experience a book. So it gives them a hands-on experience instead of just listening.
Hi, I'm Jim Olson, a vision therapist. Words represent ideas and concepts. Without an understanding of the meaning of words, they are no more than sounds. While looking at a picture in a storybook may assist in concept development for learners who are sighted, learners who are blind require hands-on experience and exploration. Here are 3 photos of books and their associated storybox objects. When reading When You Give a Mouse a Cookie, include objects such as crayons, a mirror, tape, and napkins. Chicka Chicka Boom Boom might include braille, enlarged print, letters, and a tactile tree. Real fruit and a caterpillar puppet can be used with the Very Hungry Caterpillar. Storyboxes provide an opportunity for learners who are blind to tactually explore items to assist in concept development and attach meaning to words while enjoying a book.
Title, Sarah Noel, Teacher of the Visually Impaired. Sarah is seated in a library.
When putting together a story box, gathering items from around the home, around the school, or purchasing inexpensive items for one of the discount stores is an easy way to have many different items available for that box.
It takes more time to tactually explore and understand an object than it does to visually explore and understand. A learner using their sense of touch needs to thoroughly examine an item in order to understand it as a whole. Storyboxes provide the opportunity to explore and explicitly discuss items and their functions. Here are 3 photos of books and their associated storybox objects. When reading Goodnight Moon, it's relevant to discuss phones, clocks, brushes, and combs. An apron and cooking utensils can be explored when reading Curious George and the Pizza. Froggy Gets Dressed can be accompanied by different articles of clothing.
A student explores a book in Braille with the teacher.
It's very important for students that are visually impaired to develop their tactile skills, their sense of touch.
Tactile development is increasing the child's ability to use their sense of touch to learn about the world around them.
We want them to be able to differentiate between objects.
Tactile discrimination is the ability to obtain information through the sense of touch. The development of this skill can be incorporated into the use of a story box. For instance, while reading the book The Longest Noodle, a student can explore items with similar characteristics such as a jump rope, string, ribbon, and a shoelace. The similarities, such as being long and skinny, can be tactually explored in addition to the differences, such as the length, thickness, and material texture.
A student reads a book with Jim using a video magnifier.
8 clocks and good night socks.
A pair of socks and a pair of mittens hang on a drying rack.
So are those socks or mittens?
The student explores the socks.
Yeah.
The socks or mittens?
It's also important for our future Braille readers to be able to distinguish those dots when they're reading Braille.
Close-ups. Students explore Braille books. Title, One-on-one setting. A student explores 2 analog clocks with Jim. Split screen. A student explores a bowl and then mittens using a video magnifier.
A story box for a younger student might just be them exploring the objects and holding them for the first time. That may be a big deal for a student.
What is that?
A second student takes a sponge out of a bucket and wipes down her desk.
You know why? Maybe it becomes a family activity and then they read it with sisters and brothers.
2 boys seated together. The older boy reads the book and hands the younger boy an article of clothing which he happily explores.
As they get older, maybe they can start to identify the objects and name them. And then from there, when their skills develop even further, maybe they can use the objects to retell the story.
Good night, sock. Good night, sock.
A student explores tall socks, putting one on her hand.
We wear socks on our hands?
Yeah. We wear them on our feet.
We wear them on our feet, yes.
Title, Group Setting. An educator reads to a group of 4 students seated at desks.
If you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to ask for a glass of milk.
Concrete experiences are required for concept development, which is why real items are preferred over line drawings or representations. For example, exploring a real car has more relevance than exploring a toy car. Here, Julie displays 3 different cups she plans to provide to students so they can personally experience and explore variations of the same item.
Each student has 2 different cups. Students hold the small cup in the air. Students pretend to drink.
Okay, go ahead and take a drink. Pretend you're drinking some milk. Okay. You can provide auditory support. So provide information about texture, size, or the function of the object, and even maybe include sound effects about what sound the object would make, or to have the student use the object in a functional way.
When you give him the milk, he'll probably ask for a straw.
As an educator reads, students tactually explore straws.
Here's your straw. You can explore it.
bendy straw.
It is a bendy straw. Can you bend it?
And I have the cup.
When he's finished giving himself a trim, he'll want a broom to sweep up.
A student uses a handheld dustpan and broom.
After that, some of our Braille readers are going to be exposed to Braille, so maybe they can just follow along on the Braille. And then as they get older, they may be able to read the story along with you.
Hold title, independent reading. A student reads a Braille book.
On his
Clothing items are on the table.
boots.
Sarah presents small boots to the student.
And here's some boots. Look at these little boots. Do you have snow boots that you wear when it snows outside?
Yeah.
All right. It's important to remember when you put together a story box that it's going to look different for every child, and you need to tailor the book and the items in the story box to the student that you're working with. You might need to do just a piece of the story. You might only want 1 or 2 items for the child to explore at a time, or with the student that's a little bit more advanced, you might want to have the whole story box there and let them look through the whole thing at one time.
Put on his hat.
Sarah holds a hat for the student to explore.
That. Look at this funny hat I have. It has big floppy sides for the ears, and it's furry on the inside.
Ooh, that's a comfortable hat. Tugged off his mittens.
Can you find the mittens? They're on the table in front of you.
The student feels items on table to locate mittens.
I kind of spread them out in front of you, so see if you can find them. There they are. Thank you.
Inside the story box.
Mm-hmm.
Title, Use with a Video Magnifier. A student reads a book with Jim using a video magnifier. The word brush is enlarged on the screen. The student brushes and combs her hair. The student points to words and pictures on the screen.
Good night, clocks. And good night, socks.
Good night, Lou.
So let's find the clocks in the picture. Where's the clock in this picture? And where's the socks in this?
The student and Jim explore an analog clock with large print numbers.
Where's the number 1? Where's the number 1 on the clock? And 2 and 3.
Jim is seated in the classroom.
So when you do a storybox activity, you might incorporate the use of a video magnifier because you can enlarge the text in the book and you can explore the details within the pictures and the images in the book and then tie them back to the objects that you're going to use to hand the student.
Jim views a page from if you give a mouse a cookie.
So this is a desktop video magnifier, and we can compare the zoomed in illustration with a real crayon.
The student and Jim continue to read using a video magnifier.
Green room.
Green room.
There was a telephone.
There was a telephone.
The student explores a rotary phone and a toy cell phone.
Colors. In addition to concrete experiences, students require connected experiences. What color is the phone in the book? A tactual learner requires the opportunity to explore a variety of the same item to understand the variations that exist. Here, a student compares and contrasts 2 different types of phones. This assists in more accurate and complete concept development. Up here it says, good night comb and good night brush.
Jim presents a comb and a brush.
Which one is the comb?
Student selects the correct items.
And which one is the brush? And what do you do with the brush? Can you spell the word comb for me? What's it start with?
It's also important to make the story box meaningful to that specific student or child that you're working with. This can be with a commercially produced book where you are using the items of that student or that child. Or you can also make a book that's a daily routine in your life, like getting ready for bed. And you can use the actual items that you use in your home when you're getting ready for bed with your child.
A child tactually explores a homemade book. Each page consists of a real object, the object name in print and braille, for soap, washcloth, toothbrush, and toothpaste.
And of course, the most important part of reading a story box with a student or your child at home is to have fun, to get into it, to play and explore and encourage them to learn these concepts and develop their language and literacy skills for being a lifelong learner.
The student reads a braille book.
How about we read together?
Okay. Froggy looked down.
A student closes a book under the video magnifier.
That's the end of the story.
Title, Story Boxes for the Blind and Visually Impaired. The CSDB logo appears on screen. Produced by CSDB. Learning, Thriving, Leading. 33 North Institute Street, Colorado Springs, Colorado 80903. 719-578-2100, www.csdb.org.
So next slide, please. Great. Down to chat. Yeah, great. So I just wanted to quickly comment. I wonder, could you replace Jessica's picture with mine? Jessica's much more pleasant to look at, but okay, that's fine. So the video demonstrated both audio description and captioning. And the whole point of this is a family learning activity. So if this is going to be done virtually for tactile learners who need a sense of touch in order to get information, the story time or the storybook activity needs to be tailored directly to the child's needs and done in conjunction with family. So in other words, this is a family endeavor. The family is essential to these types of learning activities that are conducted virtually. And the storybook outlined how items can be used to identify length or size or thickness, the texture of a material. And then it went on to say to use it, how can it be used in a functional way? So in other words, learning is not only concrete with touch and sight and feeling, but it is also conceptual. Learning needs to entail conceptual development. And in this case, asking the child what function the item could be used for is part of that conceptual development. And for children that can hear, you can also ask how it sounds. Well, of course, a shoestring isn't going to make any noise, but there would be some examples where you could have noise be part of it. And so the equipment needed at home for the family would, of course, be a video magnifier, and to have the objects of the storybook shared with the family in advance, or the family take the initiative to develop the story box in conjunction with the librarian. And so that as they're exploring images in the book, they can go to the object. And so this provides a meaningful and, more importantly, fun exercise for children to develop language and literacy skills. And so with that in mind, I would like to ask the participants to share when the video demonstrated WCAG, I was going to say WCAG principles, but somehow that didn't sound right, of being accessible relative to the content being perceivable, operable, understandable, or robust. Go ahead.
This is Jessica speaking. We've had one participant, Kelly, share it was robust because each box can be applied to different children and made individualized like that.
Yes, right. And so you select the accessibility to make sure it's compatible, that the technology is compatible.
This is Jessica speaking again. One thing I noticed, the video itself that we just watched was perceivable because it provided captioning and audio description.
Yes, and so no matter who participated in the video, they would have an opportunity to have access to the materials presented. And we still have two more examples that we need, operable and understandable. Anyone want to tackle those two or one of them? Operable, understandable?
And this is Christine. Just as a reminder, understandable is that the interface operation and information is clear and easily discoverable. And operable is that the interface is, I can't pronounce this word, navigable and responsive to users.
And so the operable part of it, I think, was more related to the interactions with the deaf-blind child as it relate to going at their pace, giving them time to respond, engaging them with content that was designed to be accessible for them. And then you'll note that in the recording, there was no flashing lights, there was no busyness in the background. And so that's part of being operable. Does anybody want to tackle understandable? So go ahead.
Becky indicated understandable for the kids because they're able to interact with objects and understand them at a deeper level, far more engagement and comprehension.
Excellent, excellent, exactly. And so, meaning that it was easily discoverable. What they were trying to teach or convey was easily discoverable. Right on. Thank you. So that'll suffice. We have one example of each. We can move on to the next slide, please.
Hello, everyone. This is Jessica speaking. Once again, I am a youth services librarian and the current training and advocacy chair for Colorado Libraries for Early Literacy. I am also one of the 26%, or 1 in 4 adults in the United States who experiences disability. So I personally am really excited about virtual library programs and their potential to reach users for whom the library may always be physically inaccessible or unwelcoming. I hope that as libraries will continue to offer new types of online programs and services, even when we're back to business as usual. I'm particularly excited to both adapt some things from the Storybox model for kind of everyday programs, and then to adapt some of those elements for a programming partnership. In my library, I work with the Lone Tree Bridge program, which serves students transitioning out of high school and kind of out into the wider world. And so I'm hoping that we might be able to do some of these things. It's very exciting. For this next section, we're going to take what we've learned from the Storybox model and the 4 design principles, and we're going to apply those to virtual story times. We will explore specific strategies to make the virtual story times that we offer more accessible and enjoyable for everyone. Some of the strategies we're going to discuss today will apply more to leadership decisions, and if you are working as a video editor. And some of the strategies we'll talk about will apply more to virtual storytime providers themselves who are doing the storytime. Regardless of your role, I hope you leave today feeling empowered to take at least one concrete step towards accessibility. Slide, please. All right, perceivable. So remember, perceivable means that anyone can interact with our content regardless of how they perceive it. And to get a feel for how currently perceivable your current virtual story times are, I suggest trying to watch it without the sound. And then try watching the video with only the visual element. And think about how does that impact your personal experience and your understanding. And this is why captioning and audio description is so important. We're going to have a lot of resources for you that I will put in the chat box at the end of the webinar, and that Christine will mail out when she mails the recording. So whether you are looking to train staff to provide these services in-house, or if you would rather outsource them, we will have resources for you to do that. The Described in Caption Media program is pictured on the screen right now. That will be included in those resources, and it is a must read. And we'll also include a local and a DCMP service vendors database. I want to talk a little bit more about why captioning is important for a program that is typically geared for ages 0 to 5. Back when we started, Timothy mentioned a lot of benefits when he explained the curb cut effect, especially how captioning can aid comprehension and retention. When I talk about captioning in story times, someone almost always says, well, storytime kids are too young to be reading captions anyway. This is true, Although with so many schools turning to online learning for the rest of the school year, our virtual storytime audience is probably a much wider range of ages than it was before. And especially as we get into summer, we always see older kids at the library in the summer, right? Even so, the adults watching virtual story times with those children are reading, and their ability to participate and engage fully with our content matters. It matters for every story time, right? Caregiver participation is not just an essential component of library story time, it is a must-have piece for a developmentally appropriate screen time experience for young children. And so the more perceivable we can make our virtual story time activities and our early literacy messages, the better that all caregivers will be able to participate during the experience, and the better that they will all retain that information and be able to implement those early literacy strategies as they raise readers at home, which is our goal, right? The other thing I want to point out about audio description is even if your library is not providing captioning and audio description yet, there are ways that you can build elements of audio description into your individual virtual storytime performance. So for example, you can verbally describe the motions before you do a song or a rhyme, instead of relying on families to watch what you do on the screen, right? And again, this helps everyone know what to expect and better participate. The last bullet point on this slide refers to picking a flexible platform. It's more of a technology point. Again, this benefits everyone. As households struggle right now to share internet bandwidth and devices among numerous family members who are doing school and working from home, it's likely that many families will be watching your story time from a mobile device, right? So all families need a platform that is flexible and can easily change orientation. Slide, please. All right. Let's look at things that virtual storytime providers can do to make the experience more perceivable as well. Although your library may not be able to follow the Storybox model for everyone, right, and provide tactile experience bags in my library, we can have 500 participants, up to 500 participants watching our virtual story times every day. Even if you can't provide those tactile experiences, you can definitely suggest that caregivers grab these tactile objects in advance. Hopefully you can include this information in a slide before story time starts, in the program description on your library website, in the email if you are emailing, if you're doing a registration process and emailing participants the link, or in the video description box itself, so that families have advance notice and opportunity to grab these materials. You could also suggest some tactile ways for families to extend the virtual storytime experience at home. Like we learned in the Storyboxes video, these tactile experiences help all learners better understand concepts. Similarly, we can adapt storytime activities so that one sense is not the only way to participate. For example, the image on the screen is my personal modified mouse house flannel. If you, let's see, we can't raise hands, but we can do, I think, a thumbs up or a clap. So if the virtual audience could give me a thumbs up or a clap in their reactions if they know what mouse house is. Should be down on the bottom of your screen. Ted knows. Yeah, lots of folks know. Lots of youth services representation today in the audience. I love it. For those of you who aren't familiar with this flannel activity, Mouse House is a classic. It is super popular. There's a flannel mouse that hides, in the classic version, he hides behind different color houses. And children have to guess which color house the mouse is hiding inside. And it's very fun. But there are many ways that we can make it better and more accessible. So for example, adding variation besides color to this activity enables children and families with color blindness to participate in the fun. Adding more variation also better builds every child's vocabulary and background knowledge. Think about just the rich opportunity for discussion with this modified flannel. You can talk about the different types of houses and who might live there. Think about all the descriptive vocabulary you use when you modify flannels so that color is not the only variation. That benefits everyone. Slide, please. All right, let's move on and explore Principle 2 in virtual storytime action. Operable means that the interface is navigable and responsive to users. This principle puts the user and their needs at the center of the online experience. So one of the biggest implications this principle has for virtual story times is picking a video platform that gives users the power to pace their own experience. An accessible video does not start without the user prompting it, and the viewer can pause or stop the video at any time. I cannot stress how important this is to me personally. Motion sensitivity is a big part of my vestibular disorder, so having that power to pace my experience is really important when I watch a video. For this reason, recorded story times that families can view and access on their schedule could be preferred to, in place of or in addition to live stream performances. This strategy also improves everybody's ability to access your content. Families may not be able to tune in at the specific time your library is live streaming a performance, especially if you are streaming in the morning right now. A lot of adults are in charge of facilitating online learning at home for their older children, so making a recording available makes the experience more accessible. Virtual storytime providers on an individual level can also meet this principle by building in sufficient wait time for the audience to interact and engage with their content. Again, this interactivity is another essential component of a high-quality screen time experience for young children, as defined by 0 to 3 and many other organizations. And we need to make sure we leave in enough wait time for that virtual audience interaction to take place. Speaking from personal experience as a virtual storytime provider, this feels really weird at first. It definitely takes some getting used to. You know, I am used to having immediate visual and auditory feedback when I ask a question at storytime in the library. Kids are usually shouting and jumping up and down with their answers, right? And we don't have that feedback during virtual storytime. So it's really important that we adjust our pacing, when we plan and build in that sufficient wait time. One thing I do is I look at the screen and I smile and I count in my head to at least 10 to give people a chance to answer at home. Another element that virtual storytime providers can manipulate is their recording environment. Part of my vestibular disorder, personally, means that looking at pattern wallpaper makes me feel nauseous, especially if I'm watching someone move around in front of it and doing head, shoulders, knees, and toes really fast. But simplifying your filming environment and your background helps not just viewers like me. Think about how easily young children are distracted, right? So by filming in front of a clean and clear background, you help all families better focus on your content. Slide, please. All right. Principle number 3, understandable. This means that the interface operation and information is clear and easily discoverable. This principle really speaks to how your library picks a video platform and how your virtual storytime is promoted. So how discoverable are your virtual programs on your library website? How many clicks does it take for families to find and access your virtual storytime? For example, do they have to register for the virtual program and then get into their email to access the link to the performance later? Another question we should be asking ourselves is how forgiving is the technology when a user makes a mistake? For example, if a family accidentally exits the storytime video, how easy is it for them to get back in? This forgiveness benefits all users, both those with limited fine motor control and all of those busy caregivers, right, who are managing squirming babies and toddlers and trying to bounce them on their lap and follow along with the video. And it's also helpful for people who have unanticipated pet appearances at home. I've seen a lot of cats that seem to like to walk across people's keyboards lately. Slide, please. Lastly, let's look at the 4th principle. Robust content and platforms are compatible with assistive and adaptive technologies. So this means picking an accessible video player that is functional for multiple input modalities. Accessible media players provide a user interface that can work without a mouse. It works through speech interface and can be used with screen readers. When picking video platforms and working with vendors, We should investigate accessibility features just as much as we do privacy and cybersecurity. It should become a part of those questions that we ask vendors before we enter into a relationship with them. There will be additional resources about picking an accessible video player in the handout, but really the best way to find out if what you've chosen is accessible or not is to engage in user testing and ask users with assistive devices if this actually works. Automated testing can only go so far. Even the best tools can miss really big accessibility issues. Slide, please. And I'm going to turn it over to Debbie.
Okay, so thanks, Jessica, and giving us all those really good ideas. So what we're wondering is, what is the one thing that you can take away from this session and implement fairly quickly at your library? You can also include in the chat something that you think is interesting that you don't think is quickly implementable, but you really want to do some research and see if you can get that going in your library as well. So either way. So verbalizing, and we also have some closed captioning. Considering story boxes, watching videos with the sound off to see if you can understand it. Good. Captions and descriptive audio. Oh, good. You know, reconsidering whether you're going to record and offer pre-recorded programs. Oh, and color blindness, right. Thinking about how color blindness might affect story time and how people would see the actual book. Those are all great ideas, and I'm sure your patrons will be thrilled if these got implemented. I think one of the things that you may not think that you have people with disabilities in your community because they don't talk about them, but there are many people who will not tell you that the print is too small, or they can't really hear very well, or they've got other visual or motor issues. Generally, people won't share those things, but you can be sure that these types of issues exist in your patron communities. So those are all great ideas. Thank you for that. And I'll turn it over.
I had to interject there. I also wanted to point out that disability impacts everyone, and your staff, whether you know it or not, probably also experience it.
Okay, Debbie signing off.
So I think we have reached the point in our session today where we can take some questions. Remember, if you would, to write use questions in capitals before your question. I saw one come through earlier that was actually asking about live questioning, live captioning. And I can just speak kind of from my experience. The other presenters can come in. So we actually have a live transcriptioner or captioner in today's session. It is not something that is freely available, especially for institutions to use. So our Rachel is our lovely captioner today, and she's doing a fabulous job. I have it turned on so I can see it. And we are paying her for this session, and this is kind of what she does for a living, so that is important. I will mention very quickly, and I believe it made it onto the list of resources, that if you are an individual or you know an individual who would like to attend some things, there is a company called Relay Colorado that individuals can sign up for in order to get transcription service, and it is free to the individual. So for the webinars that I offer, I can't call Relay Colorado and have them do it for everybody, but if an individual was attending one of my sessions, I could. And I'm going to try very hard to remember that as I send out information about webinars in the future, that I include that information so that people can push it out. And I think another thing, depending on what you're doing, is if you're using Google Slides for any reason, it actually has a closed captioning service built in. It may not be as good as having a live transcription. I didn't know if anybody else had anything to add for that.
This is Jessica speaking. I wanted to talk a little bit about captioning and what is the difference between closed captioning and real-time or CART transcription, as it's known. So now we're doing a live performance and we have real-time captioning. That is a very unique skill set that generally you're going to have to pay for. That's not going to be something you can really train staff on in-house not to do well. Closed captioning are the kinds of captions that you see maybe on YouTube videos. Those are the captions that we saw on the Storybox video. And so those are after a video is recorded, and then those are added into there. And so there will be a lot of resources about captioning in the handout. I will put in a plug right now. There's a resource to a group called Rooted in Rights, and they're an amazing company. They have a lot of videos to kind of help you understand what are these different accessibility things and how do you get started with them. And so they have a training video called Captions in a Couple Minutes, and I highly recommend checking that video out as well as their others.
So we had another question that was not accessibility related, but I want to say it out loud. If anybody needs a certificate for today's session, I typed my email in the chat, and if you email me directly within the next couple days, I can get you a certificate. So another question that we have is that their library is using Facebook Live for Story Hour, and they're curious what other platforms other people are using or might be recommended.
This is Jessica again. Currently, my library is using Zoom, and they are only live streaming, which I'm not particularly happy about. People are using all kinds of different platforms. I am also going to encourage folks to think about privacy and cybersecurity when we pick platforms to interact with children. So there is a blog post, and I will see if I can get it and put it in the chat box. I recently had a conversation with the director of the ALA Office for Intellectual Freedom, and she really encouraged people to pick platforms very mindfully and to think about the privacy implications of reaching out to provide programs for young children on social media. It gets it's interesting. So it's a lot to think about. I'm just gonna pop that link in the chat box. I think the first instinct was to go for where is our community? Our community is on social media, right? But maybe that's not the most accessible way for our community to engage with us. Maybe that's not the most secure and respectful way of children's privacy, especially for children's programs to do that. I see Barbara mentioned, yes, there is a way on YouTube. YouTube got sued last year for violating the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, and they had to make a lot of changes because of that. One of the changes they made was that you can flag your video as children, as the audience, and then YouTube is not allowed to collect personal identifiable information when people engage with that video, and they're not allowed to advertise. So that's a good workaround privacy-wise. YouTube is also, it's not an accessible video player. Facebook Live, YouTube, Zoom, they're not accessible video players. Some are more accessible than others. So YouTube has moved away from Flash, and now they are working off HTML5. And so they are a much more accessible platform than they used to be. But there are actual video players that you can embed in your library website that are accessible.
This is Debbie, and I just want to jump in. And Teresa made a suggestion, and I don't know if it went by so fast in chat, but if you wanted to check a different accessibility on something, you can turn your monitor off and just listen to the sound, as opposed to turning the sound off and just watching it. So that's another way, and that would simulate what a visually impaired person would, how they'd experience the event. So thanks for that.
So another question, this is Christine, another question that came through was kind of asking the wider audience as well, but how long are your story times? And there were some people that answered in chat. I don't know, Jessica, if that was something you wanted to talk about also. We've looked like about 30 minutes seemed to be.
Yeah, I can address that. I'm also the project coordinator. The Association for Library Services to Children is working on a national guide about getting started with virtual storytime services. And how long your story time is really depends on what's your goal for the program and what's your library community. Some libraries are doing 10 minutes, some libraries are doing a full 30-minute program. It really just depends. And so there's not one right or wrong way, I guess, time-wise. My library, personally, we're doing half-an-hour story time performances.
And this is Christine again. There's several people who have chimed in, somewhere like between 10 and 15 minutes up to about a half an hour. So it's great to kind of hear what everybody else is doing as well. And another question was, are most of you, because we're using these platforms and if we're worried about privacy and security, are most of you requiring registrations for story time?
This is Jessica speaking. This is another reason why I would like to see us offer like recorded experiences, because like not only are they more accessible, they're also safer for people to view. But that's my personal take on it. I see, yeah, some places are not requiring registration. They want their programs to be discoverable. They want their patrons to be able to find them. Jennifer says that they are not doing registration. They offer live and then a recording available for 2 weeks. I love that compromise. Lauren says Arapahoe just shift. They are not doing live performances anymore. They are pre-recording videos and then adding captions and then sharing those. I love that. There is a good point also in the chat box about thinking about timing. How long should little people focus on the screen? I talked a little bit about what libraries can do to make sure they're providing a developmentally appropriate screen time experience. And so those are definitely considerations you want to take in when you're planning story time and thinking about how long it should be.
So this is Christine. We've talked a lot about virtual story times, but we have a question from an adult services librarian, and they're thinking about doing recorded readers advisory videos, and they're curious about suggestions for making those videos accessible for adult patrons, especially if they don't have any fancy equipment.
This is Timothy speaking. For all individuals to have access to captioning, if they don't have any equipment, typically captioning, you just click at the bottom of the screen, but that's closed captioning. What we've experienced today is closed captioning. You have to click at the bottom of the screen to see the captioning. There is also open captioning, which is burned in or hard-coded captioning, which is permanent captioning that's always on the screen. This is certainly ideal for young people who could benefit from developing language and literacy, but it can also be of benefit for adults who may not have all the equipment and can easily access the captioning. So that would be one consideration for addressing a lack of equipment.
This is Debbie, and to make a video accessible to visual people with visual issues, if you are going to hold up an item or you're going to show something, then what you would just want to do is make sure you're describing it, so that as if you pre-record it and test it with your monitor off, then you would know which things need to be described. And that's pretty easy to do if you're just aware of it. As you're constructing your reader advisory program, just make sure that you're doing description along the way and not relying solely on a visual.
This is Timothy. Could we switch to gallery view?
Beth, if you want to stop sharing right now, and then we can turn people's videos on. Thank you, that's a good suggestion.
This is Jessica speaking. Also about adult programs, I've noticed in the chat box, and I've heard that libraries are offering like one-on-one virtual book librarian appointments. When your library offers those services, I would also strongly encourage you to include information there about how patrons can let you know if they would like an ASL interpreter, or if they would require, you know, some additional accommodations to interact with you in that way. A lot of libraries are sharing these services and not letting people know that we can make them accessible. We are, as public institutions, it's our legal responsibility to do that. And so we need to let people know how we can do that, and what, you know, we need to let them know that that's an option when we're promoting these services.
And I just wanted to, this is Christine, I just wanted to call attention to Tessa's comment that they actually have one ASL/English story time that they pre-record, and then the English portions have captions, which I think is fabulous as well. And Timothy, you're muted right now.
Apparently you could read my lips. I try to throw in a little humor once in a while. It doesn't always work, but you know. I wanted to also point out that if you're a librarian in a rural area outside of the Front Range, you can request free interpreter services, free American Sign Language services. I believe we have it on our resources list that Jessica will put on the chat. And that is specific to my agency, the Colorado Commission for the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, and Deafblind. Whew, I almost ran out of breath saying that title. But so it's on our website under Rural Interpreter Services Project. And you go to that program link, fill out a form, request interpreter services, preferably, you know, they say 72 hours in advance, but yeah, sometimes a little bit more. And under those circumstances, at this point in time, all interpreter services are being offered virtually. So we have video remote interpreters that can come in on Zoom, can come in on Storytime and participate in your activity. And I want to point out too, I realize that there's a lot of fears right now regarding Zoom. You've heard the stories. We had that happen at my department, kind of scary. But as of May 30th, for all users who switch over to Zoom 5.0, Zoom will be encrypted after that date. No more Zoom bombing to worry about. So it's safe to use for families.
Another question that appeared just a little bit ago was, we've been talking about how it might be good to pre-record your story times for a variety of reasons, but then there's that age-old copyright question. And so editors and publishers have been okay with, well, if it's, you know, kind of like transitory and it's not just going to live forever on the internet, what to do about that. So is there a way that we can balance the two?
This is Jessica speaking. I think what I might do is I might also include a link into our Getting Started with Virtual, or what is it called? The Filming Virtual Storytimes Before, During, and After COVID-19 webinar that we recently hosted that has a lot of resources about navigating copyright and publisher permissions. I will tell you one publisher who is okay with your stuff going on YouTube is Scholastic, and Scholastic does a lot of storytime books. They don't prefer it, but they understand if that's what libraries are doing. This is another reason why you might want to look at embedding videos on your website and maybe not using social media as the way to provide the program, but instead promote it, not just for cybersecurity and stuff, but because publishers don't want you to put stuff on social media, right? They generally want you to avoid it. The other thing I want to point out about publisher permissions is that they are expiring very soon. Most of them are expiring in May or in June. And so if those are not extended, we will have to get into the habit of asking for permission. And they're responding really quickly these days. Turnaround time does not take nearly as long as it used to. If you want permission for things to go on YouTube, I would say in that argument, I would say, hey, my library really wants to make this available as a recording because we want it to be accessible, and use some of the content from this webinar that we talked about the importance of viewers pacing an experience that they don't get in a live performance. And that can kind of beef up your argument with publishers. I will also put the link to that other virtual storytime webinar in the chat box. And again, I would encourage everyone to look out for the Virtual Storytime Services Guide that is going to be coming here shortly from ALSC. So I'm going to start with that link, Virtual Storytime Services Guide, in the chat box. You can bookmark that. That will be coming soon. There is a sneak peek blog post, which is also, you can access that sneak peek blog post from the Virtual Storytime Services Guide landing page. And that sneak peek blog post addresses copyright and virtual storytime. It's going to take me just a minute to find the virtual storytime webinar link. So give me a minute while I find that.
And while Jessica is looking at that, we had another question, which gets a little bit more into copyright, but if you are pre-recording book recommendations, do you have to, what copyright things might you have to think about? And I should know, I've taken so many copyright classes that I should know some of this off the top of my head. There is something having to do with the purpose. You have to look up fair use, like the purpose, and if you just use a snippet, and I think Jessica has more information because maybe her brain is working a little bit better than mine.
It's been very consumed by fair use lately. So there's 4 factors that feature into fair use. One of those is the amount of the work. One of those is the purpose of the work. When you're doing a book talk, you're not reading the whole book, so it's in some ways it's safer than reading a whole book during story time in terms of copyright. I don't know that you would need to even get permission to book talk a book online. Booktubers, right? I think that's what they're called. They book talk books all the time on YouTube, and publishers love it. It gets them attention, gets their book out there in the world.
And there was a question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I just dropped the link to the webinar about the previous webinar, specifically about virtual story times. All aspects of virtual story times in the chat box.
Tess also asked, she said that she's offered to pre-record story times, but that's kind of been downplayed by her organization because it takes so long to upload and they have a lot of other programs that need to be posted. Does anyone know a way to cut down on uploading time?
Yes, there's a file transfer website that also came up in the virtual storytime webinar, the CLEL webinar that's in there. So in those slides and in the presentation handout for that webinar, there's a site that makes file transfer a lot faster.
And another recommendation,
called off the top of my head.
Yeah, another recommendation from Kelly is to potentially do the recording like as a lower visual. So she said that today she changed settings to 720 instead of 1080. Because yeah, uploading, especially for uploading from home, holy moly, it takes a long time.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
Josie, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So if you have already pre-recorded a story time on your device, your iPhone or your tablet or whatever, you can go into the settings on that pre-recording and look at it, what visual quality it is. Usually on an iPhone, that you'd do that in iMovie by exporting it to iMovie and then re-exporting it to your photos as a lower visual quality. On a Samsung tablet or something Android, you can usually just press and hold and it'll tell you which one you're using, and you can convert it to a lesser visual quality.
Thank you.
Christine, I think we have about 13 minutes left. Why don't we look at the resources handout if there's no further questions?
Okay. Beth, I will have you share your screen again. Huge round of applause for Beth, who is managing all the stuff in the back. And then go to the next slide. There you go.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you, Christine. I just put a link to the resources handout in the chat box, and I wanted to talk just a little bit about the different categories of resources. There are 9 pages of resources right now, so I wanted to let you know kind of what's in there. The first category is library accessibility. And this includes a recent webinar from ASGLA, which focused on making your social media accessible, and it's well worth checking out. And then it also includes a presentation from the Exchange 2020 conference that speaks a lot more to making your web content accessible. And so those are really valuable resources, and there's more in that section too. There's also a section about web accessibility. That section is going to include a lot of the web content accessibility guidelines and the 4 principles that we've referenced that Debbie took us through earlier and that we grounded our presentation in today. So you can visit that section to learn more about that. There is a section specifically about video accessibility. This is really relevant if your library is providing virtual programs through a video medium such as Zoom or YouTube. And if you explore only one resource in that section, please check out Rooted in Rights. I mentioned them earlier. They are a nonprofit advocacy and video production organization that is dedicated to making creative content accessible. And they are everyone who works there identifies with disability, which is why it's a great organization, because I trust what they say. They have a bunch of really helpful training videos and a video accessibility guide that is well worth exploring. Speaking of video accessibility, the handout also includes extensive resources for how to get started with captioning, audio description, and transcription services, whether or not you want to train staff to provide those in-house or if you're interested in outsourcing them. This includes both a local captioning services directory, which is available from the Colorado Commission for the Deaf, Hard of Hearing, and Deafblind, and it also includes a national service directory from the Described in Caption Media Program. The other thing I want to say, actually, hang on. Sorry, I'm going to mention that down below. Lastly, we have shared some accessible virtual program providers that maybe you want to connect your community with and promote. So this includes an ASL picture book read aloud video series that is being offered by the Colorado School for the Deaf and Blind on their YouTube channel. This category also mentions the Described in Caption Media Program, because in addition to having training resources available to teach people how to caption, they also have an extensive video library that is free for educators. And all of the videos on there are accessible videos. And so it's something we definitely want to be making sure that our local schools know about and that we're connecting kids and families to. Slide, please. The last thing I want to say is that we are also your resources. So we are here for you, not just during this webinar. If you have additional questions, you can contact us. We are happy to help, happy to make your programs more accessible for your community and more enjoyable for everyone.
So this is Christine, and we do still have about 9 minutes left. If there are any last minute questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. Our goal is to try to answer as many questions as you have as possible. And I typed it several times in the chat, but just as a reminder, I will email everybody a link to the archive, a link to the handout and the resources, as well as, there was a third thing. I typed it in the chat. The slides. So everybody will have the slides available as well, because that can be very helpful. Hopefully we'll have that done by tomorrow, because as we mentioned, uploading things to YouTube can take a really long time. And our session is an hour and a half. So if no one has any other questions, and feel free to put them in the chat, I do want to extend a huge thank you to our presenters today. Jessica, Timothy, Debbie, and Teresa helped in the chat from the Talking Book Library. Basically, this webinar would not have happened had Jessica not contacted us, and we just thought it was such a fabulous idea. And so we hope everybody enjoyed what you learned today and can hopefully start implementing. And I think I'll just kind of throw in one small thing that we talked about when we were putting together this session. Is there's a lot to absorb with all of this, and you don't have to do everything tomorrow. So once again, think about small steps that you can take to make the programs a little bit more accessible, a little bit more accessible, and a little bit more accessible, because every small step will make a difference in the end.
And this is Debbie. If you want to include in chat, if we did another webinar, what would you want us to focus on for accessibility? Is there some, we focused on story times as an example, but is there some other area that you could use some help with? So you could just include that in the chat if you want.
Yeah, you can include that in the chat. I also will include a survey when I send all of you the information. And so after you've had some time to think about that, you can put that in the survey as well. Let us know if there's other things you would like to see. So one of the ideas is teen and adult virtual programming and accessibility. And
that's a great idea. I think some of those principles and the things we talked about, like captioning, are going to apply to all programs, no matter what age group that you're doing it with it.
Well, if there are no other questions, once again, last huge round of applause to our presenters for today, and I wish everybody a great afternoon. Be well, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Timothy and Debbie, for sharing your expertise, and Teresa, and thank you to the State Library and Christine and Beth for hosting this. I'm so excited that you all came today, and I'm glad you are joining in the accessibility movement.
Thank you.
Thanks to Jessica for getting us going.
Yes, Jessica Frederiksen deserves the recognition. Thank you.
Y'all gonna make me blush. Can you see me blushing over the screen?
Thanks everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, bye.
Be well.